Good afternoon, everyone. We are Daystar Services, which is a tiny home construction company. This is my partner, Brandon, Zach, Brendan, and I'm Joel, and we wanted to start out by telling you what a tiny home is by contrasting it against what the typical American house is. So, the average American house is about 2,600 square feet. On average, Americans will spend 1/3 to 1/2 of their income just dedicated to the roof over their head. This means spending 15 to 30 years for many of us to pay off our home. As a result, many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and are caught in a cycle of debt. So, what is the alternative? Well, when the housing market collapsed in 2008, a tiny house movement sprung up. Tiny houses are defined as any dwelling that is less than 500 square feet. Tiny houses offer people the ability to live simply, to pursue their hobbies, and to save money. Ultimately, 68% of tiny home owners live without a mortgage. So we want to give you a couple pictures just to show you what you can expect from a tiny home. Here you can see the small size and simplicity of a tiny home on the exterior. Here's an interior. This one's built by Daystar Services. Up top, you can see here's the sleeping area and the loft. Down below, you've got the kitchen, the bathroom back there, all condensed in this small space. Many tiny home owners are able to travel at will because they build their tiny houses on trailers. Making the shift from a space that is 1/5 the size of a normal house can be a dramatic one, and as a result, the tiny life isn't for everyone. But for the people that are interested in, there are some big advantages. One such advantage is the ability to get off the grid with alternative power sources such as solar power and rainwater recycling. It's this kind of living that first interested our client into starting his company, Daystar Services. Daystar LLC is owned and operated by Mr. James Ash. It was started in 2013 and is located just about 5 minutes outside of Salem on State Street. Mr. Ash works with customers to build customized homes from the foundation up to build their ideal tiny home. He's committed to high standards and he is dedicated to building with integrity. Most importantly, Mr. Ash has a heart for the Lord and believes that his business is God's business. Ultimately, he would like to see the success of Daystar Services be used as a means to start a nonprofit, which would be called Paraclete Ministry. Paraclete would build transitional tiny homes for single moms and their kids and the homeless. Here's an example of one such community that is currently operating up in Washington right now. What they do is give people a house and a chance to get back on their feet and to be able to find work and then potentially get a house of their own. But before we can get here, we need to take you back all the way to when we first found out that Daystar Services was going to be featured on Tiny House Nation. In case you don't know, Tiny House Nation is a TV show on the FYI network that is all about the tiny house movement. On May 15th, the episode that features Daystar Services will air, and we can expect that this is going to bring a lot of potential customers and a significant boost in marketing. From several companies that we talked to, they said this was the case when they were featured on Tiny House Nation. One company even said that no sooner that the show had ended, that they were already being flooded with emails and phone calls with people making inquiries about their tiny homes. This is important because the biggest problem that Daystar Services faces is keeping up with demand. Currently, Daystar Services is able to produce 1 unit about every 5 weeks. They're currently contracted with 3 other customers that are waiting for their tiny houses to be built. And in the time since we've been working with Daystar Services, 5 potential customers have approached Mr. Ash and made an inquiry about a tiny home. But when they found out about the wait, they decided to take their business elsewhere. So we know that on May 15th, there's going to be a lot more people calling. And if nothing changes, we can expect that the number of potential customers that have to be turned away will only increase. So this is where we come in. We will show you in the following presentation that we can double Daystar's production by going from building 10 houses to 20 houses a year to keep up with the demand. To tell you a little bit more about our production recommendations, I'm going to hand it off to my partner, Brandon Brown.
Thank you, Joel. Now we move into the operational side of Mr. Ash's business. There were 3 key problems we identified with his business: limited labor supply, total production time, and limited space. The first problem we identified was the labor supply. Currently, Mr. Ash has 2 full-time employees that handle the majority of his production work. This is great if he wants to stay the same size he is, but he wants to expand his business beyond the 10 tiny homes he produces a year. And this really limits the ability he has to expand. The next problem we identified is the total production time. Currently, it takes about 5 weeks to produce 1 tiny home, as Joel mentioned previously. And this isn't a bad lead time if he wants to have 1 client in line at a time and not grow his business any further. But because of these longer lead times, as he gets more clients, it has pushed business away from him, and he's lost 5 clients so far this year. So 2 of the areas we saw major room for improvement is the electrical and the plumbing. His 2 current employees do not have expertise in either of these areas, and because of this, it has caused a lack of efficiency and slowed down production. The third problem we recognized is he has 2 production bays that he operates out of currently. It has offices on one side of it, and then the 2 bays are just big enough to fit 2 tiny homes in. This is great because he can get both the homes inside and work on them, but he doesn't have enough space to produce anything else while the homes are inside, and the homes aren't big enough to handle production work inside of them. So the procedure became to dry in one of the tiny homes and then push it outside and freeing up a bay so then his employees can work on cabinetry and other components that will go into the tiny homes later. But this is super inefficient because they have to build the components over here and then carry them all the way outside to the tiny home where they'll be installed. This really limits his production goals. Here in the Hoff School of Business, we do not focus on problems, we focus on solutions. You're welcome, Mr. Lindell. In order to solve these problems we have identified, we created 3 solutions: outsourcing, expanding the labor force, and expanding the production facility. The first recommendation is to outsource the production of both electrical and plumbing. These were typically 2 of the slower components of building a tiny home. And outsourcing them would decrease the amount of time that Daystar is working on 1 tiny home, freeing up Mr. Ash's employees to be able to work on other components such as cabinetry that can be installed in a later point. This will further decrease the production time of 1 tiny home. The next recommendation we have is to hire an additional 2 employees. These 2 new employees will be able to team up with one of the existing employees in order to learn the standard operating procedures of the business. This will enable Mr. Ash to have 2 production teams to handle building homes simultaneously. This will reduce the overall production time because he'll be working on 2 of them at the same time, and then also decrease the dependence he has on the 2 current employees and be able to handle more production. We also recommend that he increase his dependence on outside contractors like we recommended in the previous slide. The final solution we have is to lease an additional bay. We recommend that Mr. Ash leases 1 more bay so he can move half of his operation into that facility and leave half of it in the existing facility that he has. This will allow his 2 production teams to work independently of one another and produce 2 tiny homes simultaneously, further decreasing the production time. We recognize that with an additional bay comes additional cost, such as the cost of tools and other equipment that will be needed to produce tiny homes in that bay. With these recommendations, we believe that we can conservatively increase the production levels from 10 tiny homes a year to 20 tiny homes a year, increasing Mr. Ash's profitability and reducing the lead times he's losing clients over. Next is Zach with marketing.
Thank you, Brandon. I'd like to talk about marketing with everyone here, starting with marketing impediments. My team and I identified 3 major marketing impediments that are affecting Daystar services right now. These are brand confusion, an unidentified target market, and a lack of direction. When I talk about brand confusion, what I mean is that previously, Mr. Ash operated this business under the name thevintagecottagehome.com. He built Vintage Cottage Homes, and you can find him online at thevintagecottagehome.com. Currently, he operates it under Daystar Services. He builds tiny homes, and you can find him online at thevintagecottagehome.com. You can see the confusion with having a name that doesn't really represent the product. In 1 month, as Joel mentioned, he will air on Tiny House Nation, and he is going to air as Daystar Services, so it's important that we get this problem solved within the next month before the show airs. Any confusion between Daystar Services and the Vintage Cottage Home is going to negatively impact the brand image of Daystar Services. Next, the target market. Tiny homes is a fairly young and nebulous industry, so it's hard to exactly peg down who the purchasers of tiny homes are. But based on our research, we found a couple things. One, the average tiny home purchaser has above average income annually, and about 40% of them are over the age of 50. We expect this target market to grow in subsequent years, as well as become easier to identify. The last impediment we found was that there's a lack of direction. Mr. Ash has some really good ideas for the future, such as the Paraclete Ministry. However, they're just ideas and they're fairly intangible at this point. He doesn't have a roadmap to get there. He has no formal mission or vision statements in place, and he has no long-term goals established. So talking about market research, we looked at the impact that the show would have, and we looked at the Marion County area. Since being featured on the show and mentioning that on his website, he's already seen an increase in demand. And based on our research, as Joel mentioned, all of the other featured home builders have seen large increases in business. However, they were not specific in how this increase came. So Mr. Ash is going to have to prepare for both the best and worst case scenarios of being featured on this show. And in the Marion County area, we identified approximately 9,000 households using the characteristics that I just mentioned, as well as a couple others that our client gave us, such as being minimalistic and being environmentally friendly. Moving into the recommendations, we had 3 recommendations for our client. 1, that he gets a new domain for his website. 2, that he updates the entire website along with that, as well as establishes some forms of social media. And lastly, that he establishes mission and vision statements as well as goals for this business. Currently, the business can be found at thevintagecottagehome.com. We recommend that he changes it to daystartinyhomes.com. Having Daystar in the URL will alleviate any confusion between the 2 brand names, and adding tiny homes to the URL will increase search engine optimization and hopefully make this business show up higher on Google searches. Along with that, we recommend he updates the entire website. Mr. Ash builds a quality tiny home, and we believe that his website needs to be of high quality to represent that. And going along with that, we recommend he has some social media. He currently reaches clients through word of mouth and Craigslist, and we believe that Facebook would be a good way for him to reach out to clients, as well as clients to reach out to him. And we believe that Instagram would help promote his brand image as the pictures begin to circulate. This is a picture of the website before. This is a picture of the website after the updates. You can clearly see that the second website offers a higher quality tiny home. Last, we recommend that our client establishes some mission and vision statements. These will do 2 things. Internally, they will provide direction for the business moving forward. Externally, they will represent the business and promote a brand image that we believe is favorable for Daystar Services. Last, we recommend he establishes some SMART goals for the business. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. These goals will help Mr. Ash measure up to see how close he's getting to these dreams of his, such as Paraclete. Now to talk about the financials and wrap us up, Brendan Detweiler.
Thank you, Zach. I'll be discussing the financial implications of our recommendations. Mr. Ash has a well-established business, and therefore the costs of our recommendations are minor. I'll be going over the new cost breakdown per home as it relates to the current cost breakdown, the startup costs associated with our recommendations, and the profit and expense projections we are estimating based on those recommendations should they be implemented. This graph illustrates the total cost per home in relation to the individual cost per home, as well as compared to the current cost per home that he has. As you can see, the cost is fairly similar. The primary focus of our project was to provide Mr. Ash with recommendations on how to increase his production capacity to keep up with the demand that he's receiving. However, through that process, we were able to decrease the overall cost per home. The material costs remain the same. The labor cost did increase by just over 2%. This is a result of the outsourcing of both the labor, or outsourcing both the electrical and plumbing costs as Brandon laid out. Yes, the labor cost did increase. However, this allows Daystar Services to increase their production capacity to keep up with demand. The overhead cost per home did decrease by 2.5%. This is a result of Daystar Services being able to produce 2 homes rather than 1. Therefore, the overhead cost is allocated over the 2 homes rather than just the 1. Overall, the total cost of the home decreased by about 2.2%. There are some startup costs associated with our recommendations, first being the additional bay. This additional bay, as Brendan mentioned, allows Daystar Services to have the production area to be able to keep up with the production capacity we're estimating. The second is additional tools to outfit the new bay with the equipment to be able to keep up with the production. This number is based on tool costs that we have researched, as well as looking at the estimated tools that are needed for the new production bay, as well as the tools that are already in possession. The final cost is for the new website. This is estimated based on the hosting, development, and software needed to create that new website that Zach laid out. This chart shows his current profit and expense, as well as compared to the estimated profit and expense we are projecting based on the increased production. As we have mentioned before, his increased production should double, and that should increase the sales, which should alleviate and be able to keep up with the demand of the current business that Mr. Ash is getting, the interest that he has, as well as the potential interest from the Tiny House Nation TV show. If our recommendations are implemented, we do believe that the profit, annual profit, in comparison to the current year and to the first year will increase by approximately 145%. This will allow Daystar Services, Mr. Ash, to be able to start his nonprofit ministry, Paraclete, sooner than expected. In summary, we are recommending that Daystar Services increase their production, improve profit margins, and expand their market share based on the new facility, additional employees, and the increase in efficiency that comes from that, as well as improving the marketing with brand distinction and continuity through the new Daystar Tiny Homes website, addition of social media, and the establishment of mission and vision statements. This is all to help Mr. Ash raise the capital to start his Paraclete nonprofit ministry. That's the ultimate goal. We want to say thank you to our client, Mr. James Ash, as well as our community mentor, Mark Morse, and our faculty advisor, Sean Hussey. We're now open for questions. Thank you.
I've got a question.
All righty, Marty.
So what a fun project, and what an opportunity to be on TV. But it doesn't sound like you guys have a marketing problem. It sounds like there's a production problem. So I didn't really hear you address the production problem, or I didn't really hear if the owner wants to increase production per se. I mean, I heard that, but I didn't hear the focus towards that. So can you address that a little bit?
Yeah. So as far as the lead times he's experiences, is that what you're asking me about?
Well, you know, they're producing 10 homes a year, and you gave an estimate of doubling that.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there's potential
To
much
increase,
greater than that.
to increase greatly beyond that.
Yeah.
And part of our recommendation to only double his production is because if he were to expand much greater than this, we feel that the market is kind of uncertain in a way that it could be a fad or it could be something that continues. So greatly increasing.
So all your arrows were pointing up for
Yeah.
every age group.
Yes.
So that didn't look like it was hesitant.
Yes, but if we're chasing a fad versus an actual trend to where the fad could drop off completely, then he's stuck in a production bay, production facility that's much larger that he can't afford.
Did you explore, I mean, like, so what's, moving to another production facility, did you actually go scope one out to know that it was $600 a month?
Yes, that's what he has in.
So that was a year lease?
That was per month, but yes, it's to go along with the current production bay he has. His landlord agreed to lease him another bay at $600 a month.
Okay, so he is already renting in the same space?
Yes, the bay is slightly down, is
Okay,
down a little bit further.
so if you already know your cost there is going to be fixed, and going off of that, you're saying that you're only going to double production, but you don't know what it's going to be, and all the arrows are pointing up.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that you could scale that pretty easily by getting even more bays and work out some sort of contractual issue because he's already been there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could work on that premise.
And did you? Okay.
Another part of us not expanding further than what we did is our client has some personal beliefs where he does not want to be indebted and go into getting a larger bay. So right now with his capacity, this was an option that's feasible and lets him hold to those convictions while still expanding, if that makes sense.
Jonathan? Thank you very much. A question from a tiny Welshman. That's one aspect which I would have picked up on too, that it's your job to be respectful of the client's values and so on and so forth, but also as business students, if the potential is a lot more than the client is seeing, then the exploration of ways in which that may be possible in a manner that's congruent with their values may be worth exploring and seeing what is possible. Secondly, I don't think we heard much about the comparison to other tiny homes. Unless I missed that, how much of a threat or a change in profitability is possible by comparing what else is out there in the marketplace?
Can I answer the first question?
Yeah.
So in regards to your first question, in addition to the why are we not recommending a higher production, there's also a sense of urgency with this project because of the TV show and it being aired in a month. And so we wanted to be able to provide realistic opportunities for our client within that time frame. So we felt to be on the more conservative side with trying to keep with most of this availability that he has currently. And then you're totally correct. Down the road in stages, he can expand on that and hopefully grow beyond that. But this at least gets him to that stage of being able to handle somewhat of what the TV show will be able to provide. Did you want to ask something else?
Interesting.
Sure.
All right, thank you. I don't know if you guys are at all uncomfortable with trying to answer questions in a theater from a guy named John Booth. I don't know if that's that makes you a little uncomfortable. I saw the picture of the little house being driven in the opposite direction of here, and I couldn't help but thinking of my in-laws, and that might just be an interesting marketing strategy. My question for you is, a lot of times with my clients who are contractors, when they have a demand problem, it's usually because they have a pricing problem. They're pricing their product way too low. Would it be possible, did you look at changing the price, increasing the price, especially given the demand that's going to come with the show, to increase revenue and help get that nonprofit started a little sooner?
Yeah, you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So we did look at increasing the prices, but currently Mr. Ash is comfortable where they are at, and he's increased them 3 times in the past year. So we didn't want to, not that we couldn't have recommended this, but with the level of production he's at and the quality that his clients are getting, he comes in a bit below the market average for a tiny home. And that's kind of where he wanted us to keep the pricing around, if that answers the question.
Brock?
So I actually do own a tiny home, and you're right, the time to get the tiny home is ridiculous. It took like 6 months, something like that. But I had a question about Salem regulations. Is there any regulations that you guys that are going to affect selling these homes later at all?
Yes, currently there is a ban on additional dwelling units. The tiny house kind of regulations right now with the legislation is still very nebulous and it's still being decided. There is some kind of momentum in changing that legislation in Salem, but Salem and only one other city in Idaho are the only ones that currently have that ban. So a lot of the customers that Mr. Ash is getting aren't actually residing in Salem or taking their tiny homes there. They're moving around a lot and are simply from other areas in the Willamette Valley and even further than that.
Yeah, Salem's really great about banning cool things like tiny houses and Uber and stuff. So I had one more, just a comment. Your guys' SEO research is great. It was really on point. You don't need to get rid of the domain. Pro tip for you, just keep it and forward it to the new one. But yeah, great. I loved it.
Over here.
I've got a question about your analysis of speeding up. So you're doubling the staff, which in theory should double your production, but you're also outsourcing, which should reduce the load on that staff. So why is your production not greater than 20?
I can take it. Okay. We wanted to give a very conservative number because we do recognize that the tiny homes he builds are oftentimes custom. So some of them can take longer than 5 weeks, and then some of them can also be shorter than 5 weeks. For instance, he will build, if you would like, he will build a tiny home that is just the trailer deck, and then it has the walls stacked on top of it, and he'll strap that down, and you can come pick it up and finish it yourself. So the production time is really changes based on the individual home. So we wanted to be conservative in the numbers that we gave.
Ben?
Okay, so I see Jim and his 2 staff members being really qualified folks that have the ability to build these homes. And barring any regulation issues, the blessing of them being portable is being able to have them shipped across the country. And so as I was listening to your presentation, I was wondering if you guys had considered where their raw materials might be sourced currently, and if there were other places in the country where maybe it would be more advantageous from a tax standpoint, or where the resources were gathered. And even if you could utilize Jim and his staff as consultants, where they could go out and actually teach others about this model, if there's something unique about this particular tiny home, so that it could be replicated more quickly by other folks who might be qualified. Here in this particular area, I think of, during the presentation, Karsten's, I think of Adair Homes, I think of Modern Building Systems, which has similar units, but very, not the same quality. And I think about the structure that they have regarding their manufacturing facilities and tools and equipment, and if there's a way for, Daystar Services to partner with them in some way to utilize their manufacturing, or if these companies are just so big and there's, no patent or nothing unique that would keep them from being overtaken by competitors.
Did you explore that? That was something we did not look into, but it's definitely something we can look into with our client, and we really thank you for recommending that.
Okay, Dave, down here, you have the mic, go ahead.
So if he's concerned, understanding the concern about managing growth and avoiding indebtedness and all that, but he's concerned about the increased interest after the show on May 15th, but he's only doubling productivity. Did you talk to him about the potential impact of, he's still going to be turning people away?
So yes, we realize he will have to turn some of them away, and I believe some of them will be turned away by the price of the tiny home itself. That's been one of the bigger factors in people looking at it and saying, well, because it's this dollar amount, we don't want to be, we're not interested. But yes, that is something. And in investigating with other tiny home manufacturers that we were able to contact with, they didn't give us concrete numbers of what is increased demand would be after the show aired.
So when you were looking at the increased costs and adding employees, in adding the facility, you looked at the facility, you looked at the tools, you looked at the salaries. Did you also consider the additional cost of benefits, the additional cost of workers' compensation insurance, and also transportation? Because you were also talking about pulling one out and having to travel with the cabinetry. Now that you have this additional bay, there's even further travel.
And maybe I made that unclear. The additional bay is a stone's throw away from the existing 2 production bays that he has. So it's a walk from this side of the Psalm Center to the other side. And then pulling the tiny homes out, he would pull them out in front of his shop and work on them out there. So his employees are having to work inside the shop and then take everything outside, versus being able to work in the shop and then install the cabinetry and other components right in the tiny home after that.
But won't you have that same issue?
Oh.
If you have
In-
3 bays and you're working, you have office in 1 and you're working in 2, and you're still going to have to pull those homes out and deal with transportation and the production lag that happens with that transportation.
Currently he uses a forklift to move them between the bays. So it's like a maybe 1 or 2 minute, travel, just, dragging it down
So
trailering it down.
transportation's not
So
an
transportation's a non-issue with
Okay.
this. And then the other bay does not have offices in the side of it, so he can actually work on building cabinetry or, raw components to the tiny homes in that bay, and then use the other 2 bay shop that he has to build in one side and then install in the other.
As well as the one bay that has offices, the offices only take up part of the bay. So there is additional room in there. So that does alleviate some more. I think you were thinking that, I don't know. So that there is more space available with the additional bay.
I guess what I'm wondering is if transportation's not an issue, why you mentioned it.
Simply because of the fact that his employees are having to build something, over here, and instead of being able to just pick it up and set it right in the tiny home, they're having to carry it, transport it all the way out, like outside of the shop, which in Oregon is rain and other issues like that.
So that's really not changing.
No, but it is inefficient in the fact that he has to carry it outside.
To further address that, he will be able to fit the tiny homes in the bay and produce in the bay with the 2 facilities, if that makes sense. Previously, he had to work in the bay, pull one out, and then the one that was out of the bay, he had to transport the supplies to. Now he will be able to produce the homes in the bay as well as the materials for the homes in the same bay, so he won't have to go outside to put the stuff into the homes.